Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. As John mentioned, my name is Ryan Haglund. I lead the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. We are a legal advocacy organization, and our mission really is to identify structural load-bearing walls of inequality that if we topple them, will open up opportunities. And our work is organized around three pillars. The first is economic justice. That's a pillar that's led by my colleague Demelza Baer. Our second pillar is around criminal justice reform. That's a pillar that's led by Andrea McChristian, one of the panelists tonight. And the third pillar is really around civic engagement. That's led by my colleague Scott Nowakowski. Now, looking at you all, I see folks are both energized and a bit weary, given all the energy you expended last night voting in the race. So clap it up for yourselves. Because I know everybody who was old enough and eligible voted last night, right? You weren't kept away from the polls by the rain, because you know that rain has a purifying agent. And that when you participate, democracy is made stronger. And for me, one of the highlights from last night was watching what happened in the state of Florida. So you all know that the voters in Florida passed an initiative that will restore 1.4 million people to the voting rolls. And the reason I love that example is because it is an example of what can happen when we organize ourselves around policies that open up opportunities through democracy to have a stronger society. It's when we hold the line. In that case, that was 1.4 million people who had criminal convictions. Here in New Jersey, there are 100,000 people who can't vote because of criminal convictions. There's legislation that's been introduced that we want you to support so that New Jersey can be next in building that campaign from the ground up and hold the line, as the mayor says. I want to welcome my board members who steward this organization. I want to welcome so many of you all. I know the mayor's men's group is here holding the line on behalf of the city. And I want to thank John Schreiber for making this world-class venue available to us. We really are blessed to have NJPAC in our city. And it really is our love for this city and our love for this city's mighty people that we're here tonight to have an honest discussion about where we are as a city, yes, our challenges, also our opportunities, and in light of them, what we are to do together now and in the next 50, and how we take advantage of this moment's unprecedented promise. So you all know that 50 years ago, just 8 days before his assassination, Dr. King came to the city of Newark. And he came here to build support for his Poor People's Campaign. But 50 years later, something interesting has happened. New Jersey is, as many of you know, one of the wealthiest states in America. The median net worth of New Jersey's white families is $271,000. The highest net worth in America. But for New Jersey's Latino families, the median net worth is just $7,020. You catch that? Median net worth for New Jersey's white families, $271,000, the highest in America. But by stark, staggering, and really shameful contrast, the median net worth of New Jersey's Latino families is $7,020. For New Jersey's black families, the median net worth is $5,900. And this staggering inequality is also felt right here in the mighty city of Newark, where 1 in 3 black Newark residents live below the federal poverty line. In many ways, our city is a modern-day example of Dr. King's Two Americas. Because on one hand, the city is home to one of the largest transportation hubs in the United States, Fortune 500 businesses, world-class research universities and cultural institutions, a large network of hospitals and community health centers, and in increasing numbers, luxury apartments attracting upwardly mobile professionals. As a testament to the strength of Newark's economy, the majority of the people who work in the city earn more than $40,000 each year. On the other hand, though, Newark residents hold just 18% of all jobs in the city. And while 3/4 of New Jersey's residents are Black or Latino, 60% of those who work in the city of Newark are white. 1 year prior to Dr. King's historic visit to Newark in 1967, violent encounters at the hands of the police catalyzed the Newark Rebellion, which erupted after decades of frustration and justifiable anger about the enduring effects of poverty, of racism, and a lack of opportunity. Life magazine described what happened here in Newark in 1967 as a predictable insurrection. And now, half a century later, we are still learning the lessons of the Newark Rebellion about the need to address the underlying systemic issues that led to it and to fundamentally transform the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. In 2016, following a devastating report showing findings of widespread unconstitutional police misconduct, the city of Newark entered into an agreement or a consent decree with the Department of Justice to bring widespread transformation to the department. And as you will hear tonight, the consent decree process is the beginning of the effort to build a police-community relationship the residents have urged and advocated for more than 50 years. One that is based on trust, transparent policies, consistent trainings, and real accountability. And we're building a system to connect local residents to the prosperity in their city through efforts like Newark 2020. We're also at the beginning of a movement to transform New Jersey's shameful youth justice system into one that builds our young people as opposed to building prisons for our young people. You see, you don't have to go to the southern border of the United States to see children of color torn from their families and caged. No, that happens to Black and brown kids at mind-blowing rates every day right here in Newark and in cities across New Jersey. A Black child in New Jersey is 30 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white child, the highest racial disparity in America. This is true even though research shows that Black and white kids commit most offenses at about the same rate. As a result, in the entire state of New Jersey, a state of more than 9 million people, there are 22 white kids who are incarcerated. On October 26, a few weeks ago, on the eve of a rally that we held with many partners, many of you in the room, we called it the Rally for the 94%. It was a rally to hold Governor Phil Murphy accountable to the 94%. 94% of Black voters voted for him, and it was a rally to focus him on these critical issues confronting Black voters. On the eve of that rally, the governor took an important step toward transforming the shameful youth justice system by signing an executive order to transform youth justice and creating a youth justice task force. And part of this transformation will require that New Jersey begins to invest in our city, invest in our young folks, and not investing in building prisons to incarcerate them. In 2019, for example, New Jersey will spend $281,000 to incarcerate each kid. This is an increase of $30,000 from the previous year. Can you all imagine what you could do were you to invest $281,000 each year in the life of a young person? And while it's true that these numbers are sobering, 50 years after Dr. King's visit to this mighty city, Newark is poised to serve as a bright light for progressive action that makes investments in its people, that builds systems that powerfully connect local residents to the prosperity in their city, that transforms policing and youth justice and increases public safety at the same time, that grooms a new generation for leadership and holds existing elected officials accountable to those who put them in office. All right. And that builds a public school system under local control that provides a world-class education for every student. And so to have this conversation about Newark the next 50 tonight, we are fortunate to be joined by an incredible collection of community residents, leaders, advocates, educators, activists, and experts who are working on the front line of these critical issues at a critical time. And since we know you have questions of your own, at 7:30 and 7:45, there will be ushers in the aisle to take your questions. We'll answer as many of those as we can in the program. So let me now begin by introducing each panelist. First, this gentleman, like many of our guests, most of our guests in fact, needs no introduction. He is regarded as the most progressive mayor in the country. His name is Ras Baraka. In addition to holding the line, as you all know, the mayor was a former high school principal and councilman of the mighty South Ward, a neighbor of mine just 2 blocks to the left, and as I mentioned, the mayor of the mighty city of Newark. Next, I'm excited to introduce to you Paul Fishman, former U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. During Paul's 8-year tenure as a U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, he led the consent decree effort to bring widespread transformation to the police department in Newark, and he created a groundbreaking reentry effort that was hailed by President Obama as one of the best in the land. He's an Institute board member and now a partner at Arnold & Porter, and is bringing the branch of the international law firm here to the city of Newark. Next, I'm introducing my colleague Andrea McChristian, Associate Counsel, who leads our criminal justice reform work. Andrea is a passionate advocate who serves on the monitoring team overseeing the consent decree between the City of Newark and the Department of Justice, also helping to lead our effort to close youth prisons and invest in our kids. Andrea is a resident of Newark. She attended Yale University and Columbia Law School. She is no joke, and my colleague, Andrea. Next, I'm excited to introduce Professor David Trout from Rutgers Law School. Professor Trout is a distinguished professor of law, and he's the founding director of the Center on Law and Metropolitan Equity, also called CLIMB. Among his areas of study and teaching include the impact of gentrification, and he's authored a major report called Making Newark Work for Newarkers, Housing and Equitable Growth in the Next Brick City. Welcome, David. Next is Junius Williams. Junius Williams came to Newark a couple of years ago from Yale Law School. He came from Yale because he wanted to help organize a politically and economically exploited city, and he never left. It's a story that Junius tells in his classic book, Unfinished Agenda, Urban Politics in the Age of Black Power, and his website, Rise Up North. The chair of Newark 350, Junius was recently named Senior Research Associate of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Junius. Next is one of Newark's leading educators, Mary Bennett. Mary is a former Newark High School principal and is a leader in the effort to improve Newark schools. As the chair of the Newark Education Success Board, she'll prepare the district for the return of local control after 22 years. She's active in the Alliance for Newark Public Schools and also is an adjunct faculty at Seton Hall and Montclair State University. Welcome, Mary. Next, Shana Russell. Welcome, Shana. Shana came to Newark for graduate school. And after Shana earned a PhD in American Studies from Rutgers, she decided to call Newark home. She's now program manager for States of Incarceration, a national initiative exploring the roots of mass incarceration. And next, Victor Monterosa. Victor is referred to as the people's lawyer. He's now with legal services after spending 4 years representing homeless kids at the Covenant House. Victor is a member of the Newark Civilian Complaint Review Board. He's co-founder of Homes for All Newark and the Urban Cooperative Enterprise Legal Center. An Ironbound resident here in the city of Newark, he's a graduate of Vassar and Rutgers Law School. And finally, I'm excited to introduce and ask you to help me welcome Sandy King. Sandy King is the 25, some folks aren't even 25 in the room, 25-time Emmy Award-winning host and executive producer of Due Process. Sandy conceived of, produced, and will moderate this panel. A lifelong Newarker with a passion for social justice. She's also a trustee of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. No one has covered Newark longer or better than Sandy King. Welcome, Sandy King. And before turning the program over to Sandy, I want to direct you to the screen for a quick excerpt from Sandy's groundbreaking 1987 documentary, Newark, The Slow Road Back, which traces the roots of the Newark Rebellion and the 20 years that followed.
This city is dying, and we're going to try to prevent that death and make it come alive again.
It's live. It's live in a very subtle way. When the land in the Central Ward is worth $250,000 an acre, ain't no way you take it.
Thank you for coming out. We're very excited to have this conversation tonight. Thank you to my panel for being a part of this. The clip you've just seen was from a documentary I did 30 years ago, a look back at the Newark Rebellion. It was made in '87, 20 years after. So why haul it out again tonight? Well, the impact of those 5 days in July of '67 remains the critical moment for those of us who lived through it, and even those born long after. It left 26 dead and changed the course of this city. So for all of last year, we were obsessed with the 50th anniversary. What happened? Why? What came next? And though just last night we saw game-changing midterm elections, we tonight are talking local business, because we now find ourselves in another time of profound change for Newark. A time of unprecedented investment and development. So we figured it's time to assess the possibilities and the possible pitfalls. And Mayor, that puts a heavy responsibility on you. How do you balance the benefits of Newark's boom with the risks to the city's most vulnerable residents? And does the city have the muscle and the will to ensure that the corporations and developers coming into this city pass along meaningful gains to our residents?
First, I want to say, hold the line.
Hold the line!
I want to start with how you ended, right? The muscle and the will is kind of the piece that really disturbs me. Because when people think about Newark, they always look at us as hopeless or helpless, that people have to come and save us, or direct us, or give us information, or organize us. We have been defending ourselves for a very, very long time. So not only do we have the will, we certainly have the muscle to advocate for ourselves and make sure that when people come to our community, that we're able to do the things that we need to do and get them to do what we want them to do. And I'm not saying it's an easy task. There's no city in America that has done what we're trying to do. It's not been successful anywhere in the country. Anybody who tells you that they've stopped Western democracy and capitalism at that rate is wrong. In fact, most people are struggling to create equity in their communities. There's some specific things that have to be done that Policy Links talks about, that stuff that we, suggestions we got from David Trout and Climb and those organizations, working with them. One is to make sure we have inclusionary zoning. That's key, and we do it in a timely fashion. And it's not just about having inclusionary zoning where people live in those places downtown, because ultimately we don't want everybody to move downtown. And frankly, I don't think everybody wants to move downtown. What we do is...
And not everybody can move.
Right. Well, everybody don't want to. So at the end, they want to live in their own neighborhood. But we're focused on that. What we need to do is, when that wealth comes to the city, we have to begin to use that to subsidize development that takes place. In fact, there's twice as many affordable projects going up in the city than there's actually market rate housing in the city right now. Let me finish. The second piece is rent control. Having a strong rent control ordinance. That, by the way, I authored and passed as a council person. But
The ordinance is strong, but
right.
how is the enforcement?
Let me finish. Rent control. And then secondly, we are the second city in the nation that is doing right to counsel, right? So we have and are trying to construct and develop opportunity to have right to counsel, right? And these are things that just happened. This is not 30 years, 40 years. We're talking about a few months that these things have been laid out on the table. And not only that, we are investing in home ownership and trying to get folks in this city to begin to develop on their own. So projects we're talking about subsidizing are projects that we got regular community folks that are developing and investing in, not just nonprofits like the Urban League, New Community, all these things, but regular people from the city of Newark who are buying and investing in property that we subsidize, or projects that we subsidize throughout the community to make sure that they stay low income, that they sustainable, and that we make sure these folks have businesses of their own. And the last piece I would add to that is Newark 2020, trying to make sure that our residents are employed, that not only are they employed, that people are investing in the small businesses in our community.
So the goal is 2,000 new jobs, 2,020 new jobs.
Right. But I wouldn't say that's the goal. That is the beginning of creating a culture where corporations become responsive to the community that they're in.
How do you force them to do it?
Huh?
How do you force them to do it?
Well, we do it collectively. So first of all, we create a collaborative model, which is what we've done. We bring groups in like the Institute for Social Justice. We partner with other folks. We track that information. We put pressure on them to make sure they hire them. We create opportunities through job training and giving them individuals through the hubs that we create, whether it's New Community or Urban League or the Workforce Investment Board, to make sure that we're channeling people in that direction. Now I'm gonna tell you this. So our job is a collective job. So we're not victims. And I don't operate from a frame of reference as a victim. And I don't need anybody to save me. Right? So, at the end of the day, these people are going to come to this community. So it's a privileged position to say that you don't want nobody to come. It's a privileged position. Why? Because you have what you need. When there are people who are unemployed, so we didn't vote for unemployment. We didn't vote for our kids to get murdered in the street. We didn't vote for all those things. Nobody raised our hand. So while we're waiting for people to have these intellectual diatribes and discussions about how we fix things, our kids are dying, they're unemployed, they have no health care. We have to provide for them today, not theoretically. So I got to give them a job, and then maybe after they work, I can invite them to the program so they can debate with you guys about how to make America equal. Until then, we have to do what we can to make sure that people are and that's a collective effort. It's not an effort. And these things that I'm telling you are not something that I came up with. So I want to say that that's not what I came up with on my own. Like I sat in the room and said, "Oh, this is brilliant," right? These are things, Policy Link, there are other individuals. We sat down, we took recommendations from Rutgers University, we took recommendations from here in terms of how to buttress development in Western democracy. How to create, if you will, a kind of a barrier when development comes down like an avalanche, that it doesn't crush the people in this community, that we're able to sustain ourselves.
And that's what we're here to talk about.
Right.
So, David Trout, you studied gentrification. You've studied what happens in some cities when this avalanche hits. and you've worked with the city to caution against and guide against what can happen when you've got too much too soon and you've got a poor citizenry that could wind up being destroyed. How close are we? You said in your report, which by the way, all of you should go online and get, it is absolutely brilliant. In the report you say, no, we're not at gentrification in Newark, right? How close are we though to the kind of pressures that could actually force out the poor in our most fragile neighborhoods?
Well, we're close because it's already happening, but it's not happening through the traditional process of gentrification. The risk of displacement in a city like Newark has been underway acutely for at least 10, almost 15 years. And that's because of an affordability crisis. And the affordability crisis has been driven by things other than, you know, people who enjoy microbrew and small dogs and all the rest that we associate with gentrification. I mean, there are a bunch of supply and demand factors. We haven't had the growth in affordable housing in the city. A lot of abandoned properties, high vacancy rates, a lot of demolished public housing that wasn't replaced on a one-for-one basis, and then obviously very serious demand issues when, as Ryan discussed, you've got people who really have not been able to afford the increased rents of an increasingly wealthy metropolitan area where there are just fewer other places to go. So that becomes a sort of a supply and demand issue that's plagued the city for a long time and created intense displacement risk for a lot of people. So if gentrification were to come to Newark, it would come like a tsunami. And so it becomes critically important for the city to play a much more protective role, which is really a role that all cities should play. And so the mayor is absolutely right. When you look around this country, including democratic strongholds on the coasts, you will see some of the very worst gentrification and some of the worst displacement. And it's almost as though very liberal and sometimes progressive mayors have turned around and looked at a reality after the fact and say, my goodness, we're losing our poor folks. Well, you can't look after the fact. You have to recognize it, in part because you are complicit in it, right? Gentrification doesn't just happen. Investment doesn't just happen. So cities actually put out subsidies. They put out programs to attract capital. They try to compete for jobs and all the rest of it. All of that is fine and good. It's a way of protecting your residents. But by the same token, you have to protect the residents you have and not the residents you hope to get.
And in our neighborhoods, there is fear that our poor, who are overwhelmingly renters in this city, will be forced out of their homes. Curiously, 30 years ago, back to Newark, the slow road back, we were still in a deep economic slump. There was no gentrification, and yet that same fear of displacement was already with us. Tanya, let's roll it.
It seems to me a squeeze out is going on. You know what I'm saying? They squeezing the people out slowly but surely. The rent goes up every month.
I don't have no place to move. I don't know whether I'm moving out. I'm trying to stay out as long as I can. I can't let to go, that's all.
We can talk about the interest in real estate in Newark, the increase in values of real estate, the amount of development downtown, and take that as progress. That's progress if you think physical is progress, but if you're concerned about human development and where they stand in this whole development process, I don't believe it's progress.
You think the poor are being chased out of Newark?
Oh, I think so, very definitely. Yeah, rents have gone up substantially without any really increase of affordable housing for people of limited income. The affordable housing they're talking about really requires a fairly significant salary compared to the median income for people in the Central Ward.
And many of you will recognize Reverend Linder. Newark's new community. We lost him earlier this year. He was probably responsible for more affordable housing in the city than any other single individual. He believed that the powers that were in business as well as government wanted the poor out of Newark. That was well before there was a boom. So we'll get back to the specter of gentrification because it floats over this city and we're all nervous about what's going to happen here.
So can I say something? Because I can't.
Yes, you may.
I can't let that. And the reason is that was 1986, right? 87. Well, it's, 20, 30 years ago, and we're still in this condition, period, today. And, so you have all these people in Newark who constantly, or come here or do whatever, who constantly talk about, what's going to happen to us. And that's always been the thing that bothers me. Like, what's going to happen to us? We're nervous about who's going to put us out. Well, nobody's going to put me out. Right? So, and my job is to make sure that we create systems where these things happen. And they don't happen because we create them, you snap your fingers and they take place. They happen because we organize them and we make them happen as a collective community. We know how to do that. We've been doing that for years, right? And so all of the institutions in the city have to come together and figure out how we get this to work. So I don't want us to spend another 30, 40 years talking about what's going to happen to us in the city of Newark without talking about what are we going to do to move the needle in another direction. So I've just outlined a whole bunch of things that we are doing.
Tell me, for instance, on rent control. You mentioned rent control.
Yeah.
We agreed that it's a strong...
It's one of the strongest in the nation.
Strong ordinance,
right.
Not enforced.
Well, that's not true. It is enforced. It might not be, it is enforced. As a matter of fact, not only that, part of the issue in rent control is that a lot of these buildings are not registered, right?
Exactly.
Right, so let me finish. They're not registered because they haven't been registered for decades,
right.
As a matter of fact. We have Jay Lee, who's been in charge of rent control, has just been able to begin to get retribution from these folks who have not registered. Force them to register their buildings. Not only force them to register, even have gotten landlords to repay residents money that they've overcharged them. That's factual. That's stuff that has actually happened. That needs to happen more widespread. So our goal, Sandy, is to, as a community, be able to identify those people who are the most egregious. That's what our system should be organized around. Not just saying it's not happening, but to organize ourselves to identify folks who are egregious, bring them to the table, force them to pay retribution for the things that they have done to our community. Not just have the law and sit back and say, oh, this is working, that's not working. We all have a responsibility to be involved in what's going on in our community, in our city. All of us have a responsibility of doing that. I'm just, and I'm not alone. There are people who want to take a direct and active role in making sure the city is created in a way that they see fit and not just sit back and watch people do stuff to them and then complain that people are doing something to them.
Junius, while we're on housing, that used to be among your many careers that you had and that you continue to have. Housing was one of them. We talk about affordable housing. What does that mean in a city like Newark? And is it unreasonable for poor people in Newark to think that affordable housing is not something that they can afford, especially as the city becomes more and more developed?
It means we have to look for another way to build houses. You've got the capitalist model, which the mayor talked about up here, and yes, you've got people coming into town with a whole lot of money, and they're buying up property, and they're land banking. They've been land banking, by the way, since 1987 when your program came up. That's right. Because some people could afford to do that. They just hold on to the land and wait because they knew Newark was coming back.
Or to buildings like the Haynes building.
Buildings, the Haynes building, the old West building downtown here, where you used to could go and buy a fabulous piano. So that's there. But now underneath that radar screen, there are some things happening that are bubbling up that could certainly be used here. And I'm looking at, I've been studying containerized, the shipping containers. Have you all seen shipping containers. That's all those containers you see pile up on when you go down Route 1 coming onto the airport. Well, people around the country are using those to build houses. And those houses, those containers can be sturdy, they can be attractive, and they are less expensive. And we have the land, and we have a mayor who has the same vision. He wants to find some new ways to do things. So that's not the only system that can be used. We built some prefabricated houses over in the Central Ward that are still standing. And the advantage of those prefabricated houses was you build them in the factory, you bring them out, you put them up, and those houses have been up there now for about 30, almost 35 years, and they're still in good shape. So I'm saying underneath some of these things, and I think the mayor named two qualities that you have to have when you're leading a city like that. One is intelligence, and number two, you have to have the guts, and you got both of that. So I think if we get together and devise a way that the community, the power, I call it in my book, the power in the street must go along with the power in the suite. The power in the street means you. We have to organize ourselves, and we have to do things that are not necessarily going to be designed to make money, but things that are designed to make a community.
Victor, let me ask you, you are the one person in this panel who's from the Ironbound, which has always been a sort of city apart from the city. We hear things happening down there, fights over developers coming in, people feeling again like they're going to be pushed out, like they're not going to be able to afford to live there. What are you seeing?
Well, I think that the Ironbound is in, the Ironbound, like all of Newark, is facing the possibility of displacement. Of course, I think that it's a little faster. I think that we do have to also look at, I really appreciate what was just said about taking what's in the streets to the suite, because I think that's exactly what folks who I've been working with have been doing. You know, I understand, Mary, said that you passed the rent control ordinance in 2014. This is the same ordinance that the city council, the last city council, decided to take apart. It took thousands of Newarkers, many who are sitting right here, it took Elaine Freeman right there to go and collect petitions, signatures, so that we can have over 2,000 signatures, so that we can rewrite the ordinance that was taken apart, and that's how we know that we have to enforce some of these parts. So for example, in the Ironbound or in the Central Ward, a lot of these buildings, it's not that the city isn't doing their job at going to register affirmatively. It's that that's never been the city's priority. We need to make it a priority. We need to have, remember, every property owner in the city of Newark has to pay taxes, has to pay water. Get them at one of those times when they're going to pay their taxes or they're going to pay their water, have them register their rents, have them register their building, and they have to do that at the council and at the clerk's office. That's in terms of enforcement. I think that in what we have to do, and I appreciate this idea that we have to do something new or something different. And we've heard over the last 4 years of, and I appreciate this very much, the importance of cooperative enterprises. And I think that housing, cooperatives play a special role for housing. I think that we've missed major opportunities in the last 4 years and the 8 years before that, where project-based Section 8 housing is reaching, a lot of it, their mortgages are reaching maturity. At that point, HUD lets landlords opt out of their agreement. One of these buildings was Stratford, the apartments over on Stratford Avenue. And that could have been an opportunity to sell the building to someone like Omni or like another preservation buyer. This is what happens all over the country. And actually take that contract, create a foreclosure. This is stuff that happens in New York all the time. You set it up with HUD, you set it up with the city, and then where we can really use the city is to help these folks who don't have huge amounts of capital accessible to them be able to get the equity to repair these buildings.
So why did it happen?
What happened instead was that, or what it seems to me, the mayor can correct me, but it seems like a developer came in and said that they were going to make a mixed income neighborhood with a park across the street. I invite anyone to go and look at that area. The buildings are closed. And there are hundreds of these buildings in the city of Newark. If we really wanted to keep Newarkers in the city of Newark, we can create co-ops, or we can sell it to another preference-based buyer. We can find a way to keep deep subsidies in Newark. Or that's on deep subsidies. Let's talk about public housing. All of our public housing is going to go into the RADIC portfolio. That means there is no longer public housing in the city of Newark. That means that we're going the route of East Orange. Well, people will no longer have the access to the lowest possible income, housing available to the lowest possible income. So we have to find a way also to preserve that type of housing. Or even more than that, now that we're having, that's one of the issues I've heard over the last 4 years. I really appreciate this comment that we need a master plan, all right? Not a master plan, a Marshall Plan. If we had a Marshall Plan, we could possibly create some of these buildings or push in affordability, or maybe even fix all the pipes that have lead, and now we have this crisis in our city.
We'll get to the lead. I have a problem in my house, that's for sure. And so do so many of you.
Because he said that I could correct him.
You may correct him.
Right. So, some of what he said was absolutely correct in terms of co-ops, and we have been doing co-ops. In fact, we have a paper co-op that we're doing now. The city is getting ready to purchase mid-sized businesses and sell them back to workers so they can own the actual business that they're doing. That's number one.
But his housing points were...
We have co-op housing that we're developing right now as we speak. We're developing co-op housing right now. Clinton Avenue is one of the spaces we're developing co-op housing. We're trying to do a co-op housing project downtown Newark, as a matter of fact. So these are things that we're doing. What happened on Stratford, that's not what happened. No developer came to us and said, we want to buy the property. What happened is we inspected the property several times, and they failed the inspection severely. Not only did they fail the inspection, the fire escape was falling off, and the fire department told us if people got on the fire escape, they would die.
So you're saying there was no choice to let those buildings go?
No, we did not let them go. We closed it. We took them to court. The same thing that we did with Academy Spires. We took those people to court. His lawyers, obviously, tried to force us to buy the property from him. We did not. We forced him to sell the property. So, in fact, one of the caveats in court was that I couldn't call him a slumlord in public. But in any event, we forced that landowner to sell all of his property in the city of Newark. He had to sell all of it and leave our town. That's the idea. So there's no, wait a minute.
But did housing replace the housing?
Yes, and the HAP contracts and those properties will remain. The same way the HAP contract is going to remain in Academy Spires. The point is, we fought for affordable housing. But the key thing we fought for is decent and affordable housing, right? And so I'm not going to advocate for people to live in places that I wouldn't live in, right? And so if I go there and it is horrible, people in that place want you to do something about it. That's my job. I can't go through there and say, oh, we need affordable housing, we don't have enough, we're going to let you live it, stay in this mold and all this other kind of things. So we force them. We talk to HUD, we do whatever, and HUD does not want to violate these people, because they would also have to figure out how to place these people once they take the contract away. And so we begin to have conversations with HUD about what do you do with these folks in these homes. Not only did we move them to other places, we paid their first month, their deposit, plus the traveling expense to move from that apartment to another apartment through Section 8. We did that. We did that because we did not want them to live in Stratford and Johnson Avenue, by the way. And we learned from that process that not only did we need to close those places down, when we went to Academy Spires, we learned that we should go to court first. So we threatened them. They took us to court, right? And so before they could take us to court, we took them to court first. And Academy, which became a better model. And so we forced them to sell it to Omni, like he just mentioned, and keep the HAP contract there. All of the properties that the foxes own in the city of Newark have to be sold.
And you said they're what?
Huh?
You said they're what?
All of the properties
No,
that
no.
the foxes have to be.
You said the foxes are
Well,
what?
I didn't say that. The court told us we couldn't say that. You know, you got the former U.S. attorney here.
Yes.
So
And I want
the judge tells you not to say a bunch of lawyers. So, at the end of the day, no developer came. That's hogwash.
Okay,
No developer
we'll
came
get-
to us and
we'll
told
get
us
back
to do
to
whatever.
this.
We put them out.
of housing, affordable housing, gentrification, but first, I'm gonna let you get back to it. But I don't wanna go too much further without talking about justice issues, which are huge in this city, which have always been huge in this city. Police issues, a problem for as long as I've been alive, and I know for many generations before that. Paul Fishman, former U.S. Attorney for New Jersey.
You were. That was, thank you. If I say hold the line, will somebody clap? Hold on.
You were a major figure in the consent decree.
Exactly.
The consent decree between the Department of Justice and the city of Newark, supposed to bring real change in the way that Newark police deal with Newark residents. It followed, as we heard Ryan say, a devastating report, an explosive report that said there were abuses going on daily in the city of Newark, behavior by police that was not constitutional, that was race and class biased. You're now out of office. Courtesy of Donald Trump, you're back in private practice, but still invested, I know, in justice in this city. So I ask you, is that consent decree making any difference?
So I think the answer is yes. I talk to a lot of people, even though I'm not in office anymore, about it. But let me sort of take a step back, because I think it's important to put it in a little bit of context. I've been working now, not in Newark quite as long as Junius, but I've been working in Newark since 1983. And in that time, I've been 22 of those years, I was in the Justice Department, working mostly in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the city. And things really changed a lot, not just for Newark in those 35 years, but for the way the Justice Department and U.S. Attorney's offices in particular thought about our role in the community. When I started as an assistant U.S. attorney in the mid-1980s, prosecutors in my office prosecuted cases. We investigated cases, we prosecuted cases, and if you were a civil lawyer, you defended the United States in civil lawsuits or you brought civil lawsuits on behalf of the United States. That's what we did, and that's basically all we did. That really changed by the time I came back as U.S. attorney in 2009. And partly I think it was because we were part of the Obama administration, the most progressive administration we've had in a lot of ways in a long time, certainly in law enforcement issues. And partly because Eric Holder, my friend, my boss, had been the U.S. attorney in D.C. and he had a vision of what U.S. attorneys should do in cities and how they should behave and what they should have on their agenda, and it shouldn't just be locking people up. And we had a bunch of U.S. attorneys around the country, me included, who thought that we could do more as U.S. attorneys than just handling investigations and cases. And so we started doing a lot of different things. One of which, and I'm really enormously proud to say it tonight, is in 2012, I hired a woman named Mikey Sherrill to be my and she got a taste of what it was like to work in a city like this and work in communities in New Jersey, and look where she is now, 56% of the vote. It's an amazing thing. So we started doing a lot more outreach. We started getting involved with the Institute for Social Justice on a lot of projects that mattered to the folks in this community. And we started to talk to a lot of people about the ways in which the Justice Department, the United States Department of Justice, not the United States Department of locking people up, but the United States Department of Justice could do something that was more out of our lane, but more in line with what other people were doing in the community. So we did two things that in particular, that Ryan talked about in his introduction. One was, we started the first federal prisoner reentry court in Newark that we've ever had in federal court in New Jersey.
And the then president came and congratulated.
And then the then president came, and I had a spectacular experience as U.S. attorney for 7.5 years. But there are 5 or 6 things that I got to do when I was U.S. Attorney that stand out. One was taking my now 16 but then 13-year-old son to Selma, Alabama for the 50th anniversary of the march. That was unbelievable. I went to Wounded Knee with the Attorney General of the United States. I did a lot of things. But maybe the most spectacular day I had was a day that we spent in a room, 11 of us, with the President of the United States for an hour at Rutgers Law School, talking about prisoner reentry, and in particular with one guy, a guy named Daquan, who had been in our program and had gotten out and was sitting as far from the President of the United States as I'm sitting from David, and told this story that brought everybody in the room to tears about what it was like for him to get out of prison after 10 years. And the president was so moved by it that when he went out to give the speech in the law school after that session, he changed his remarks and he started talking about this guy that he had never heard of before we walked into that room. It was a really remarkable thing. But what we did was, we basically realized, it's not that hard to realize it, that if you don't have anything when you get out, the odds of your going back in are astronomically high. And what people need when they get out, because there's a huge temptation, you all know this, if you come back to your town and you've got some running buddies who are still out there, and you don't have a job, and you don't have any skills, and you haven't been in the workforce for 10, 15 years.
And you may not have a place to live.
And you may not have a place to live, and the neighborhood's changed because now we're gentrifying, and right, and so you don't know where your place is. It's easy to snap back. And so, but if you give people an embrace, if you give them a place to go every 2 weeks where people care about them, if you give them a chance to get a job and some training and some education and some housing, some medical care, all of a sudden, every year you can take 10 of those guys, and they are mostly guys, you can take 10 of those guys and make them productive, hardworking citizens who actually then will be able to vote. And that's a great thing. So we started doing that, and that's one thing. But the second thing that we did, when you asked about, is the consent decree. Look, I've been in and around law enforcement for 35 years. And when I was the U.S. Attorney, I had no more important partner in local law enforcement in making the streets of Newark safe than the Newark Police Department. And I knew, because I've been doing this for a long time, that a lot of the people, the vast majority of people who take that oath, put on that badge, do it for the right reasons. They do it because they want to be involved in their community, they want to help keep people safe, and they want to make a difference. And by the way, they want to get a good paycheck. It's a good job. But it turns out that over time, if you neglect the organization, if you don't train, if you don't give them money, if a few bad apples start to set a cultural tone, then all of a sudden decay seeps in the same way it can in that housing. And so I also knew, even though I was doing a lot of work with them, that there were a lot of places where they were not doing policing the way they needed to do policing. Not just because it's not constitutional and not just because it's violating people's rights, which is pretty awful, but also because you can't bring a city back if the people in the community will not be partners with the police in keeping their own neighborhood safe. It just doesn't work. And so we needed to rebuild all of that confidence and trust. And so we started an investigation in 2011, and we took a deep dive in internal affairs, in use of force, in arrests and pedestrian stops, to try to figure out what was going on. And we discovered exactly what you said, Sandy, which was that there were widespread problems with the police department. I'm not going to describe them all tonight. You can go online and read the report if you haven't already done that. I suspect lots of you already have. But what it was clear was that we needed change. We needed institutional change, and we needed institutional change that wouldn't just happen organically. It had to be actually driven by some incentives and some cajoling. And so, literally, we had the report done, and the week after the mayor got inaugurated, I called him and I said, before you get inaugurated, we should sit down. And we sat down, and I gave him a copy of our draft report and said, here's what I want to do. We have enough here to bring a case against the city and get the court to order you to do this. But this is a lot better if we can do this collaboratively. And so we then spent the next 4 months or 5 months negotiating a consent decree that would put into place institutional reform across the board, that would create new training, new procedures, new systems, new tech, and new ways of supervision and new ways of investigating the police, so we could make sure that what they were doing is what they were supposed to be doing. And I'm going to tell a tale out of school that I've never told in public before, but I'm going to say it because in the late fall, early winter, it was the week before Christmas, Anthony Ambrose called me up. And he was, at that time, the chief of detectives in Essex County. And he said, can I come see you? I said, sure, because we worked a lot with Essex County. He said, he came to see me, he said, I said, what's going on? He said, Mayor Baraka has asked me if I would consider coming back as the public safety director. And he said, and I need to know what you think has to be done in this city in order to make the police department function. And I said, take the report, take the draft consent decree home. Read it over Christmas. And if there's anything in here that you think is stupid, you can't make happen, is not gonna work, call me up, come back, and tell me, and I'll go back to the mayor's office and we'll finish the thing. But if you think that what we have in that draft decree is possible and is good and can get done, I want you to call the mayor up, take the job, and we'll sign it. And that's what happened. And so since then, Anthony and the mayor have been 140% committed to reform, at least when I was on the job. We have a court-appointed monitor, former State Attorney General Peter Harvey, and I'm sorry? Okay. And we have a fabulous team, and from what I am told by the mayor and by police director and by the monitor and by the judge, all of whom are friends of mine, not in my official capacity, they don't tell me, but I ask them, how's it going? And everybody thinks it's actually making a difference and we're actually making headway. Now, people in the community may not all think that, and there's plenty of opportunity for them to come talk to me or the mayor or the police director and say what they think, but the reports, use of force reports are down 86%. That's right. The number of touches, as we call them in law enforcement, between police and the community is up almost 30%, which means there are 30% more citizen contacts year over year from between the cops and the community. At the same time, the number of complaints to internal affairs have dropped by 25%. So more contact, fewer complaints, and fewer complaints of the kind that really need to be investigated. That seems to me to be a really good thing.
And you are part of that process.
Well, thank you, Sandy, for that question. And I think something that is important to keep in mind to Attorney Fishman's comments and the comments in the opening documentary is that the relationship between law enforcement and the community has been broken for at least 50 years. And it's really up to now to rebuild that relationship. And so the Institute serves on the monitoring team overseeing reforms to the consent decree process, and we're helping the NPD build their own community engagement capacity. Let me tell you, it's a step-by-step and stone-by-stone effort. Because, again, the relationship has been broken. But what I can say is that the NPD has taken this as a serious effort to do what they can to bridge that divide. For example, we are 2 years, a little over 2 years into the consent decree process. And the NPD has written at least 13 policies that have been vetted by the DOJ and the monitoring team. Now, these are policies ranging from bias-free policing, use of force to stop, search, and arrest, and community policing. And all of these policies either had never been created before or were horribly outdated. And that's significant. And that's thanks in large part to many of you in the room who have come to the community policing meetings, who have reviewed the policies, who have held the monitoring team, the NPD, and the monitor accountable for your vision of what policing can be. And so besides kind of the outcomes and measures, anecdotally, we're seeing a sea change and with actually having the police talk to the community. For example, I heard a shout out for Captain O'Hara. And so Captain O'Hara, who leads the NPD's consent decree effort, has taken it upon himself to really reach across the divide, to really literally sweat through his shirt sometimes at meetings, to talk to community members and have those uncomfortable conversations. To the point where just a few months ago, after one of our community policing meetings, People's Organization for Progress went up to Captain O'Hara and invited him to present remarks at their annual commemoration of the Newark Rebellion. Can you imagine that even happening just a few short years ago? So I think what's important is even beyond the consent decree process and beyond kind of the pages of the consent decree, at the Institute in our own policing work, we always think about what does it mean to police? What does it mean to police a community? And with that, we think it's really an investment in the community. Looking first to them. What do you want? How do you want to be policed? How do you want to be made safe? Because a recent survey of Newark residents showed that most Newark residents actually want more police patrolling the streets. But they want police who are from Newark, who live in Newark, who are of this community. And so something that we've championed at the Institute, and I know Mayor Baraka has championed personally, is a residency requirement. A 5-year residency requirement for law enforcement officers. And there's actually legislation right now S 1917 that's in the legislature requiring a 5-year residency requirement that I encourage you all to support and push.
Given the police law, what's the chance that we get that?
Well, can I speak to that? We actually had it. The governor vetoed it. So the legislature passed it. Governor Christie vetoed it. So if we get him to pass it again, this governor will sign it.
So you think it's going to happen?
It should happen. I spoke to the governor in advance, and I'm sure he'll sign it if we can get it through the legislature.
94%.
We get it through the legislature again, it'll take place.
Victor, let me pull you back in here because the other piece of this, Andrea talked about there being fewer complaints. The complaints were designed to go to you and the other people who are on the police review board. The police review board's been stopped by the police unions. Where are we with that?
I mean, unfortunately, we are kind of in, well, there's an appeal that's coming up. At that point, you know, for folks, an appeal isn't a second bite at the apple. An appeal means that you're reviewing the law. So if the law from the first time makes sense to the judges and to the appeal judges, then we might get the same result, and we might really have a CCRB that won't be able to have the subpoena power. On the other hand,
but at this point, you can't do anything in terms of hearing cases. You've not heard a single case,
well,
I think.
The purpose of the subpoena power is to be able to enforce requiring the police officer that may have engaged in misconduct to appear before the CCRB. It isn't a subpoena power. I mean, it's a subpoena power like the Congress has subpoena power. You have the power to call someone up, not to arrest them or something like that. But without that power, or even beyond that, they attacked that power, and they also made an argument saying that this is extra disciplinary. Right. So the idea is that we as a board are violating their constitutional rights. And so we still review policies. In fact, the policies that were just mentioned, the 13 different policies that have been developed, we've looked over them, we've gone through them, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to look at policies. But this also, of course, makes it impossible to, there were 2 avenues before. You could do the investigation through the CCRB, or you could review an investigation that's already been done by Internal Affairs. We can't do either of those. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'd love you to talk to that question.
So this is a conversation that the mayor and I have been having since we started negotiating this consent decree. Everybody agreed that it was very important to have some meaningful form of civilian review of what goes on in the police department.
Yes.
The question is, what form does that take? And the consent decree intentionally left it up to the city in some ways to decide what form that should take. It turns out that the union's complaint, whether you like the fact that the union complained or not, the union's complaint is based on the way the state statutes are written, which has to do with both civil service laws and other things. And the question is, so the question is, does state law need to be changed in order to allow any city in this is not unique to Newark, any city in the state of New Jersey, right, to involve civilians who are not members of the police department, right, in that particular aspect of review. Now, the mayor and I talked about this a lot because there are lots of things a civilian involvement in the police can do. It can look at the policies and have input into the policies. It can look at the disciplinary files and see what the trends are. It can determine whether the Internal Affairs Department is doing its job.
But hearing cases, Paul, hearing individual cases.
It's very controversial. And the reason
I want to know where you stand on it.
Well, it's very controversial. Here's why. And I had this conversation with the mayor. The mayor was a principal, and before that, he was a teacher. And if I said to the mayor, I'm just teeing this up, I'm not telling you where I stand, but if you answer to the mayor, listen, you did something in the classroom. You're a union member, you did something in your classroom, and you're being brought up on some sort of disciplinary charges for what you did in the classroom. And that hearing is going to be held not by people who are education professionals, but by civilians, people in the community who have an interest in how the school is run.
Right.
And the answer, and there's some people will come down on one side of that, and some will come down on the other. So that's really the question, and it's not an issue for the consent decree. It's an issue for, again, will probably come out, if the appeals court comes down the way the trial court did, it will probably come down to an issue about whether state law needs to be changed to permit that kind of involvement in these sorts of...
Should it be changed?
Absolutely. So I think...
So you don't buy Paul's argument?
Well, we argued about that a bunch of times.
In a friendly way.
The reason that is different there is because the police institution have a history of abuse and murder. Right. It's different, right? So it raises the level of what's necessary. I think what Victor said is right. I mean, he made a comment about the rent control piece, but that's not a contradiction, right? And I'm gonna show you the relationship. So citizens should make sure that the laws remain the way they are. They should make sure that the laws are strong. That's not a contradiction that the citizens strengthen the law. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what this is about, right? That's what collectivity and collaboration is about. So at the end of the day, the problem doesn't rest at City Hall because the union chose to take the thing to court. What people should be doing instead of yelling is going to the court and going to the state legislature telling them that we need to have subpoena power. Or the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey, who creates the guidelines and can change those guidelines tonight, as a matter of fact. That's how you collaboratively begin to get the things done that you want done. The problem is we are stuck at a level where we have made our allies our enemies and our enemies our allies. And that's the problem. So if the rent control ordinance is weakening, they're supposed to strengthen it. So if the Civilian Review Board is under attack, we look for the residents to make sure that it's strengthened. So Larry calls me in Pop and says, listen, what do you want us to do? What you always do. Right, that's what I want you to do. I want you to do what you always do. Go out there and have a march and say, we need subpoena power.
Never gets
right, and that's what they're supposed to do. And we can work together to make that, because I agree we need to have subpoena power. In fact, I created it so we can have subpoena power. Right, and it's wrong. We can have a discussion about what happened. I mean, there's alternative facts and evidence that fit your narrative, but the real narrative is we came up with the concept. We sat down with the ACLU, with us, with other community organizations, and we came up with this. The mayor didn't do this on his own in the secrecy of his house. We came up with this and said, this is the strongest we can make it happen. Even went back and forth with the ACLU about it, the strongest we make it happen. We said, let's get it done. Everybody in the place said it's going to get thrown out. In fact, it was people in your office saying, listen, do we want to threaten, jeopardize the fact this is going to get thrown out? Or do you want to have something that we know everybody's going to agree to and be able to allow them to do something?
You say better have it thrown out and keep fighting.
Yes, my concept is we should push it. I mean, Brown versus Board of Education had to go to the Supreme Court. You understand what I'm saying? It's important for us, if we believe this, if we believe it and believe that's what we should do, then we have to fight to make it happen. No matter what the setbacks are. No matter what the setbacks are. And the kids, we should be doing it together.
Mayor, let me bring in Shana Russell. Because for some of us, these concerns, these arguments have been going on for as long as we've been cognizant. You chose to come here. You came here to go to graduate school. You decided to stay, and you tell me that you're thrilled being in Newark. What's your reaction to what you're hearing here, where there's a lot of angst going on?
I mean, well, to the issue of policing, right? For me, public safety and policing are related, but they're not equivalent, right? So I think we've reduced this to a conversation about police and community, police versus community. But the thing that's been proven to reduce crime most often is raising the minimum wage and increasing jobs. And so I know it's more complicated than the ways in which we have these conversations in forums like this one. And for that reason, right, the things that Newarkers bring that sort of experience and history to it, that's why I chose to stay here.
Mass incarceration is your area.
It is.
It's a problem that impacts this city as much as anything else that troubles us. We are told that the numbers are down in prisons, but who keeps going to prison? Who keeps getting arrested? And what do you do in a system, particularly when you've got a national administration that likes that?
And people who profit from it. I mean, to your first question, right, we know that black and brown people are the folks who end up in prison and for whom punitive policies are made for. I think Newark, compared to other cities, actually does a pretty good job with reentry, but the work is on the other end, right? What's causing people to end up in prison to begin with? Those are issues of employment, those are issues of safety, particularly for young people, so we need alternative forms of incarceration, all kinds of other options and resources that folks really do need to prevent those things from happening.
But there are places, Shana, where reentry starts in prison.
Sure.
It doesn't happen here.
I think it does happen here.
Does it?
I think educational opportunities, again, we're comparing, right, Newark to other cities around the country.
Well, we're comparing New
which
Jersey,
doesn't make it a
because
perfect,
now we're
right.
talking about New Jersey.
Which doesn't make the state a perfect place. But in terms of opportunities for folks inside, it's further ahead than a lot of other places are.
Absolutely.
Now the bar is really low, but it's still further ahead. It is. So there are places where, I mean, I was just in Washington. You can't get a 4-year degree inside a prison in Washington State, anywhere. And so the fact that, I mean, we're very lucky to work at Rutgers and be colleagues with the folks in NJ Step who have done a lot of work and are setting a great example for what opportunities for folks inside can look like. So again, the bar is low, but New Jersey is certainly far ahead in terms of reentry services and services for folks.
But when you come out of prison, unless you're coming out on parole and you're monitored and maybe there are some programs that are there waiting for you, good or bad, that's one thing. If you come out, if you max out and you walk out the door, chances are you have nothing. You are not prepared for a place to live. You don't have a job. What are your options?
Same options for other folks who live in the city who don't have jobs or places to live.
Well,
Which is not to make light of that situation.
But now you have a record.
Right.
Sure,
Doesn't that change things?
it can.
It does. So I think the law, I think, and it's something that legislators have been talking about, I think it's important that we begin to move away from this maxing out thing, right? I think when people come home...
But we don't do parole in the state much anymore.
Well, I'm talking about people, when you come home on some kind of supervision, if you have some kind of supervision, you're more likely to have a better outcome than you have no supervision at all.
Agreed, but I'm saying in this state,
Right, so
the
that's
way the parole boards worked.
Which is why I just said we need a legislative response to this, which is instead the money that we could save from allowing people to max out 20, 30 years. If you have a 25-year-old kid who gets 25 years, they're coming back to the city. It's best to allow them to do part of that time and use the savings to invest in these kind of social programs to begin to get them to move back into our community in a way that's possible.
Any
So all of
traction
these
in the legislature for that kind of...
Well, there's a lot of discussion about it, and so we need a lot of support and push. We need you and your platform and all the other folks to begin to push and say this is what we want collectively, because that's what benefits us. The majority of the people that get arrested in Newark come home. The majority of them will return.
Almost everyone will.
Right. So
95% of people who go to jail
Almost everyone
come home
will
or come home to a place they think is going to be home. And that
Right.
they're going to be somebody's neighbor, right? And if we don't help them out, they're going to be a bad neighbor, right? So we...
Junior, you want to jump in on this?
I think we have to create opportunities for people to come home, so to speak. And that challenges the definition of development, because it's not just bricks and mortar. It's what are we doing to develop people? Because that's our greatest asset. So I look at a place like Washington, D.C. They're doing food development through urban farming. Now, I know we see people, we have little gardens around the block, we see people doing that during the summer, but they've lifted it to another level. I was reading a magazine, I've been doing some study on this. I'm writing an article for that new group you all heard I got appointed to. Well, I'm doing that, I'm writing, I'm reading, I'm doing all kinds of stuff. And I haven't left Newark, I'm just going down there on the train and coming on back. See, so in Washington, just let me Local residents use farming and food to overcome the trauma of being perpetually at the bottom of the well. This is a brother named Xavier Brown. One of the farmers working on the Dick Street Community Garden in Northeast DC said, "Black people need to return to being growers, builders, and producers. So when we're consuming, we're also feeding one another and we're feeding our liberation." That's right. Hold the line. Hold the line. One of the examples that he uses is that they were building these bins to build. They were building 32 bins. They were developing the compost soil made of food scraps. And who was helping to do that but 6 former felons? They were creating jobs for people. Creating jobs for people. The same thing is happening in Detroit. Urban agriculture has become a player in neighborhood development. Urban agriculture is feeding some, empowering and healing others, and has even spawned a number of profitable businesses. Because you take the food and you develop your pies, you develop your sauces, you put in a little West Indian this, a little Southern this, and you got a commodity. So that's the kind of thing that she was talking about. You create opportunities for people before they go to jail. And when they get out of jail, there's some option for them to do.
James, before we go too much further, I've got to talk about education, something I know that everybody on this panel cares about, but nobody more than Mary Bennett. Where are we with a system that for generations has failed kids?
Right now, I think we're at a new start point, because after the last 22 years, and especially the last 6 years, even things that were good, much of that has been dismantled. So I view us here in 2018 at the beginning of a new vision for the Newark public school system. We've got to get on the right track, and we've got to help to develop the confidence by the community that they can put their children in our schools and they can get a quality education.
Public schools, not charter.
Public schools. I'm an advocate for public schools. I realize that when some people speak of charter schools, they say, well, they are public schools. I'm sorry, they do not walk the same walk until accountability is the same all the way across, until people can go to their buildings and walk through the way people can come to a traditional public school, the playing field is not level.
And bottom line, do the charter schools actually hurt the public schools?
You're a joke. Financially, remember the way the 1995 charter laws written for the state of New Jersey, they receive 90% of the per pupil expenditure, as well as an additional adjustment amount. So the money that you need to fully run and have optimum functioning in your public schools, those resources dwindle. Also remember public schools, especially I'll call them not disparagingly, but sincerely, the network public schools, like the KIPP Team Academies and the North Stars, they have outside funding that supports their operation in addition to the funding that they get from the district.
Public schools can't accept that kind of money.
Well, public schools can get money, but you can't just give it to the individual building. It has to go through the system. The bureaucracy that is tied to how we function, that is not tied to how they function, makes it a much more difficult lift. That does not excuse us from not planning, sharing, and doing the best that we're supposed to do in every school. When a child comes to my school, that's my child. If there are issues, it's my responsibility to work with that child, to work with that family, to find resolution. I cannot say, here, take your child over there, we can't meet your needs. No, the public school system has to meet the needs. Has to meet the needs.
Before we had charter schools, going back again to '87, let's listen to the scorching indictment of Newark schools back then by the then president of our county college. Tanya, let's roll it.
Charter schools are joking.
Attention all classroom teachers. We have a massive problem from the younger years of education on up.
Newark is coming back, a boom, renaissance, construction. The reality is, blacks and Hispanics are not in those corporations. If education is not our priority, then basically, even when the doors are open, we will have nobody to take those jobs.
It's very, very sad, but in this world today, and if you don't have basic skills, there's nothing for you to do.
It's unfortunate because with all the changes that have taken place since 67, 68, education has not been one of the primary areas for a major change.
So, the question becomes what Zach Yombo was telling us there, that Newark kids weren't being prepared, wouldn't be able to take the jobs even if they came. Junius, is that where we are now?
Well, that's one of the places that, you see, we have installed in our school districts curricula, I guess you could say, that don't make the kids feel as though they are all that they can be. And that goes way, way back. Not individual educator that I'm talking about. So what we have to do is to develop a curriculum that teaches young people who they are. Now, one of the things that I've been doing, y'all make a mental note of this. It's a website called riseupnewark.com. I want you to look at that. 500,000 people have looked at that. riseupnewark.com. And we were successful in getting the Newark School District to adopt a curriculum based on that website. Now, what does that mean? It's a history of Newark and its people. It's a history of black power in Newark, how we got power, how other ethnic groups got power, and how you compare the two. People need to know that. Some of us right here in this room need to know that. But especially young people need to see that they are somebody. So that's the kind of affirmation that's been accepted. Now I'm waiting for Roger Leone and me to sit down, see how we're going to roll it out. It's already been accepted. But there's another part to play in that. We're talking about skills. How about new skills? Again, developing where we can go with what we got. Some of the research. Solar farming, solar energy. There are communities in this country that have set aside some land to put out. You see these plates that they have out here to collect the sunlight? Well, that sunlight goes into the grid. That grid can go into public service, and whoever builds that solar farm will get money, will be given, there will be job opportunities. I saw at least 20 different kinds of jobs coming along with solar farming. Now here's something I discovered. Public Service said some time ago, a few years back, we want to build more of these solar farms. Well, why can't they do that in conjunction with some of our co-ops around the town? Why can't we have a partnership with some of the people right here in this room? So that means going into the education aspect, our school district can prepare our young people to take those kinds of jobs. These are jobs of the future. It shouldn't be all going on in China. That's where most of the solar development is going on right now. And we sit back waiting for somebody to dig the next oil well. Solar energy is where we should be. We have land. We can put together the kind of land to not only put cheaper energy into our home, but have enough money in the grid, have enough power in the grid so that public service can pay our groups, and then people will understand how to use money for some power, because that's the next step in black development.
Andrew, you wanted to get that.
Sandy, I want to add on Julius's comments about the investment we're making in our students, because I think there's a bridging of the gap between the questions you were asking about mass incarceration and schools. Because as a former school teacher, and I'm joined by former school teachers on the stage as well, I know something that gets lost in the mix about mass incarceration or criminal justice is our young people. And while we have in New Jersey, we have decreased our youth population. our numbers of youth who are incarcerated by more than half over the past few decades. Let's be frank, the kids who continue to be locked up in our youth prisons in the state aren't from Montclair. They aren't from Short Hills. They aren't from Summit. They're from Newark. They're from Camden. They're from Trenton. So these are our kids. These are our students we need to be worrying about. And as Ryan said before, we have the worst racial disparities between black and white youth being locked up in the nation. We're number 1 here in New Jersey. We're number 2 for how many Latino kids are locked up versus how many white kids in the nation. Where today a black child, as Ryan said, is 30 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white child. But what does this look like? In New Jersey, we have about 190 kids locked up. Very small number. 130 of them are black, and only 22 white kids in the whole state locked up. 22 white kids. And we know, as Ryan said, research shows that black and white youth are committing most offenses at similar rates. And any difference in offenses can't explain these extreme racial disparities we see.
And the governor now says, in response to lots of pressure from the Institute and others, that there will be a juvenile justice.
A youth justice task force.
Task force.
But we want to get the students before they wind up into the justice.
And will that task force, the governor didn't want to take the pressure of being told 94% of the blacks in New Jersey voted for him, and you know what, you better come through with something.
Well, Sandy, let me add to that, because this didn't begin with the governor. Last year, after we launched a 150 Years is Enough campaign, on the 150-year anniversary of Jamesburg's opening, the largest youth prison for boys in the state, Governor Chris Christie, one of the most controversial governors in recent memory, announced the closure of Jamesburg and Hayes, the state's girls' youth prison.
But what did he want to do after? He wanted to build new institutions.
And we do not support the construction of smaller youth prisons. If a child does need to be out of a home, because let's be honest, there are some kids who may need to be out of a home for a public safety reason, but it doesn't need to be a youth prison. It should follow national best practices and be rehabilitated. It should be small. It should be closer to their families and community engagement. It should provide them with rehabilitation. What are we seeing now? Of the 450 young people who came out of these facilities in 2013, a third of them ended up right back when they left these facilities within 3 years. Our current system has failed. It's failing our black kids, it's failing our Newark kids, and it doesn't work. So what we asked the governor, what we championed the governor to do since January, and we're gracious that he finally did it right before, thank you, right before our 94% rally, is he created a youth justice task force. And to your question, it's not just about the youth prisons. The task force is to transform the entire youth justice system, to look at what prevention, intervention, and diversion programs at the front end to make sure our kids aren't there.
What do you expect out of it beyond a few newspaper stories that will make the governor look good?
Well, firstly, the Institute's on the team. The Institute is part of the task force, and we're not about glory and about stories. We're about making sure that we are responsive to our kids in Newark. We're based right down the street. And if I deal with these kids every day in our youth councils and our youth leadership, I can't go back to them and say, hey, we got a nice news article in New York Times. I need to be able to tell them, we had more money funneled into your community-based programs. We had prevention programs you could attend in the first instance. We made sure that when you get to the judge, if you get to the judge, that there are community-based alternatives to you being sent to a Jamesburg. We need to make sure that when a kid gets in trouble and he's brought to a station house, there's a station house adjustment waiting for him, not just being thrown in jail for the night. So we at the Institute are committed to having a front-end to back-end transformation of the entire youth justice system, not a sacrifice.
About making our schools the schools that serve the needs of the student and the family. We've got to put wraparound services in there, because if schools are anchor institutions in the community, and children come and families come, and we need to be able to meet them where they are and help them work through some issues so the child can focus on the learning, the traditional learning. But we can't leave those services for folks to go there. The kids come to the school. The parents come to the school. They're not going to go to an agency unless somebody's going to broker that. They just don't want people in their business. But if your child is coming to the school, and if there's an issue where they need help, we need to, as we start over, make sure that the idea of a community school, that the school is open to the community, and that there are things in the school to help the community, we need to make sure those things are there. Before we open up
to audience questions quickly, please.
Sure, no problem. There's something that we could definitely do. There's a white paper that has come out a couple of years ago. The Newark Police Department's budget was $103 million. If we took $130 million, if we took 1% of that, $1.3 million, we would be able to fund that into this and keep young people from going into prison. We might be able to fund the diversion program that we already have set up. We might be able to set up other programs. Those $103, I mean $130 million, by the way, come from Newarkers. They do not come from the state. They do not come from the feds. Look up the numbers. A lot of our taxpayer money, $130 million of it, goes into doing the policing right now. That unfortunately does result in people staying in that revolving door that is prison and the criminal justice system. We can definitely correct this.
Okay. We have limited time, and it's going. Before we go to those audience questions, and I do want to do that, I want to go back to where we started. We look around this part of the city, NJ Pack was a wedge for opening up downtown to all kinds of development, and it's been exciting and scary. I keep hearing Newarkers say, and I think with good reason, but all of this is not for us.
Say it again.
All of this is not for us. And that's something that was being asked 30 years ago by a member of this panel in anticipation of a change that didn't come back then. Tanya, let's roll it.
The whole revitalization of Newark didn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, it happened because somebody said the economics of the city are right for us to go about and change things. If you look at in Newark and you see how close it is to New York, you can get New York service for New Jersey prices. So somebody said, well, hey, we ought to be here. I've always said that Newark is on its way back, and the question is on its way back for who? So it's certainly a question that's on the topmost of everybody's mind. The word is gentrification.
For whom? Very much so. Newark for who? The same way do we say services and development for who? Is it for downtown, or is it for the residents in the neighborhoods? I still think that a small percent of people will benefit from a good economic climate in Newark.
Not true. Why not?
That part of it, I mean, the last statement that he said, at the end of the day, folks like you and other folks who say stuff like that, when you go eat in South Orange, you go eat in Maplewood, you go eat in Soho.
Don't you?
Come on now. Let me finish. I do. But I also go to eat in Newark. I mean, but let me finish. So we spend our money in other people's towns. And so the leakage of that money goes to develop those communities all day. And so at the end of the day, the things that we don't want in our city, we go to other people's city to partake in. So we do have to be careful with that privilege and that contradiction that we have, a privilege that I have and a privilege that you also have. So supermarkets that come up in people's communities allow people to go to the store and do those things and shop and buy. So the reality is, when people say something is not for me, that's a mindset. 196,940,000 square miles of the planet Earth is for me. All of it is for me. So when things are built in the city, we have to change people's mindset to make them believe that everything that goes up and is built in the city is for them. And then we create systems to be able to allow people the opportunity to get those things, right? So we have to, we didn't vote to be the ones to be poor. So we have to advocate, yes, that we increase minimum wage. We have to advocate that people own their own things. We have to advocate, like Julia said, that people be able to empower themselves and own and purchase and be a part of this, a part of an economy. We have to advocate for those things. And you can't build stuff downtown or anywhere in the city for that matter and tell people or make people think that is not for them, right? People in this city should believe simply by virtue of the fact that it's in their community that is for them, right? And then and if there's things that are barriers stopping them from getting to that stuff, then our job is to knock those barriers down and work collectively to get the things that belong to us in this city.
Mayor, I know you want to
sir.
I'd really like to live across the street.
Yeah, but most people don't.
I'm an attorney, I can't afford it.
Most people don't.
Sandy, since you raised the question of this structure and this building, certainly when I made that comment, this structure did not exist, nor did the idea. I can't say anything but positive things about NJ Pat, and that's because of the leadership here. It ain't just about the building. You know, they have programs for music, they have programs especially for jazz, they have programs for dancing. It's all about, as the mayor said, how we make use of it. You have to come in here and do what you want to do. And I think you will find that you are welcome. Now, there are some places that aren't quite as friendly. There's some places around here that are hostile. I'm not going to go into that. Whether you got the money or not, you just don't want to be there. But that's true everywhere. So I believe that the question that I raised then has been partially, if not totally, answered by the folks that you see around here. Development is not just about buildings; it's about who uses them and how we use that to empower people. So I'm very comfortable with some of the seeds that I hope that we planted here today.
Let me put the first question to you, David Trey. Part of communities' economic vitality is the increase of home ownership. At this time, downtown Newark is at max pricing. Are there opportunities for development in the other wards, like the West Ward, that would be less rental and more condo, townhome, or regular dwellings? Is that an answer for how we take care of our inner city?
It'd be nice. I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult for a number of reasons. We've the city's lost a lot of home ownership. The foreclosure crisis hit us very hard, harder than probably maybe 3 or 4 other cities in the country. But that's about it. So, home ownership and other opportunities for asset and wealth creation in the city have been struggling to recover since the Great Recession. I think part of what we're talking about, there are 2 pieces to it. One is to be able to use the greater resources that come to the city primarily through downtown development to reach the neighborhoods in the wards in order to facilitate the experimentation of much more interesting and more accessible housing situations. Some of which, like a limited equity co-op, may be a way to establish home ownership through non-traditional means. A city like Newark has to experiment with those kinds of things. Another way to do it, though, is to ensure stakeholdership by actually ensuring that people can stay there, right? I mean, I want to go back to this point about displacement. So what the city can do is, on the one hand, it has to continue to develop the resources available to the residents of the city through its revitalization efforts. Revitalization is not a bad thing. It is something that the city has needed for a long time. We see in these films how long we've awaited the sort of coming of redevelopment, and it's never quite come, never quite come, never quite come. Now we're fearful of it because we're afraid that it may come at the expense of Newarkers. Well, all that requires is a kind of a protective vision in which the city recognizes that it is the steward first of its current residents and makes sure that the resources that are now available to us because of redevelopment opportunities are spread equitably. So this becomes a question of how do you do equitable growth? And you do it in an affirmative way. You don't wait for it to happen, right? You take your circumstances as they are. You recognize what is available. It's not an enormous city. It's only 24 square miles. So you can have heavy impact, with the particular experiments that you deploy. It has to be well thought out. It has to be coordinated among city agencies and with the various community organizations that have so far been so active in this. But what does it consist of doing? Well, the first thing that it has to do is it has to follow the principle of trying to ensure that whatever growth occurs, people are able to stay in place. The city is in control of a tremendous amount of housing. So like the point Victor made and 3 or 4 other points we could make, the city has to ensure that housing within its own inventory or housing that it has some regulatory control over remains available, that we don't lose that inventory, okay? And we're doing that. Another thing that
Isn't that harder in Newark where we've got a large stock of decrepit frame housing? We're not a place that has many brownstones that can be revitalized. How do you make sure that those houses don't just disappear as they've been doing over the years?
Well, I think some of that is an enforcement issue. I mean, I think that part of the coordinated institutional approach among city agencies is to recognize just those kinds of facts, taking the city as it is. This is the housing stock that we have. These are the risks associated with this housing stock. What does it call for? It calls for affirmative action on the part of city inspectors to ensure that we don't lose this. Right. Because of course the loss of some of that housing is quite deliberate. It's part of a speculative plan to ensure that it falls out of rent control, that it falls out of subsidies, and that it goes on the private market where investments are made, we bring it up, and all of a sudden you have hot spots. And it's those hot spots, you know, where folks are not protected in the immediate periphery that begin to raise housing prices. So there are a number of things that you have to do, but one thing I also want to make sure to talk about, and the mayor mentioned, is that you have to recognize that some of the legal dynamics associated with displacement. And so let's not pass too quickly over things like the right to counsel. The right to counsel is critically important because one of the primary sources of displacement around the country as housing markets begin to heat up is the desire for landlords to see much greater return on investment and to use whatever means available to them to evict tenants. And New Jersey law is favorable in many respects to landlords attempting to do that, either through basic market processes or because they want to exploit opportunities that they see coming down the pike. So a key thing that this city can do, and no other city but New York City has done, is to implement a right to counsel, or at least an access to free legal services for indigent clients facing eviction proceedings. This is absolutely critical. And what happens in eviction proceedings is that something like 6% of indigent clients facing eviction go to court with a lawyer. The 94% or so who don't face insuperable odds and wind up on the street or moving around, if it even gets to court, right? And most, because of summary proceedings, for a variety of reasons, it never gets there. The pressure alone is enough. That's just one, though. But it's very important to recognize
But let me just stop you on that one because I want to ask Victor, who calls himself a people's lawyer, how do you make that happen?
You know,
who pays for it? How does it?
That's exactly the issue. I mean, who pays for it? Where are we getting money to be able to represent this level of people? We know that there are tens of thousands of evictions that are filed every year in Essex County, and a lot of them affect people here. What I fear more than even just the money, though, is that we copied the ordinance from New York City rather than tailoring or making one for Newark to begin with. We also the draft itself. I mean, if anybody wants to read the draft, please do it. It's not that great. And not only that, it says that there's going to be a nonprofit that's created to do this. Okay, when we have several good nonprofits that do it.
Could I get in on this? And I love Victor. And Victor is a Rutgers grad, and he's the one of the grads that we are most proud of. But that's not exactly the process. And I'm intimately involved in the process, not only of drafting the legislation. We recognize that Newark is different from New York. We actually see opportunities in that. And we are not trying to dupe and revise what happened in New York. What New York has relies on a very different kind of infrastructure for free legal services than Newark has. And so we have been working, and look, it's not an easy process. It's a sausage-making process. And I'm not going to bore you all with the details, but I'm going to just say this, because I think it's fair to the mayor to at least point out that we are actively involved in weekly meetings in which we are fighting and a coalition of folks, including my center at Rutgers, but a coalition of community folks to work with the city to come up with the best possible system. And Climb has invested hundreds and hundreds of hours of research in trying to look at best practice around the country at how to devise the best system for providing free legal services to Newarkers. Will it be, perfect? Probably not. It will be a demonstration project. The city is talking about sums of money. I'm afraid to say it publicly. I'll let the mayor say it. But it's a substantial amount. It's a substantial investment in this idea.
How much, Mayor?
And it is not the only idea.
No. But the point is this, though. The point is this. The point is not to destroy it because you're not a part of it. The point is to help it get better. Right? Because if it's something that we want and we believe in, you should be helping us to make it better. Not to publicly, because ultimately what you're saying, when you do stuff like that, is you wind up even objectively on the side of our detractors. And that's not where you want to be. You want to be on the side of the folks that say this is what we need, and this is how we're going to use it to make it work. So there are a few things. One, we have a committee that we organize for equitable growth, right? And that is designed, that the council is going to approve, hopefully tomorrow, right? And at the end of the day, a myriad of people on this to think about these issues as we go forward daily, as the city develops. Because we're not going to stop development, but we have to make sure that the development is equitable. And you need people that are community-based, that are smart, that figure out these issues. And that's what we're doing. That's tomorrow, right? And if there's a group of people that are interested in the thing that Victor said about the police and the money, they should come to the forum that's at Rutgers tomorrow, that's designed, organized by Newark Community Street Team, Akila Chirels and the rest of them, to do just that, to talk about how to divert funding from the police department and begin to use it to hire social workers, to hire those alternative things. Those are things that are happening now. What I would say is be involved in those things and help move it forward. And not just, I mean, I understand it because that was me 35 years ago.
Indeed, I have to apologize. Mayor, you're talking about something happening tomorrow. Something happened yesterday that is meaningful for our city, and that is word came out that Amazon was not going to choose us.
Well, that didn't come out yet. That's what the press is saying. The press said a whole bunch of things. But it's okay, because our strategy...
Well, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times say they believe it.
Okay, and I believe whatever the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times
well,
say is absolutely fact.
I'm just telling you.
I believe it. I'm sure you believe it, I believe it.
Do you think that Amazon's going to choose Newark?
Well, at the end of
We're
the day...
already hearing specific places.
So
and what do we lose by this?
We didn't lose anything. We gained from being in the process in the first place. That's what you need to understand. We've already gained. We've already won. And you know what's interesting is that people, even in this city, rooting for Newark's downfall, which is horrible, right? So at the end of the day, by the fact that we made the top 20 in the list, which is all we were ever trying to do, right? To get to the end, and we still in the end, is that we create this kind of momentum around what we need in the city, right? And those are the things. We were like the Boston Celtics playing Cleveland Cavaliers last year in the game. We didn't belong there. We was happy to be there. Right?
I don't know what that means.
Right,
but
so I just told you. But I didn't know. We got the benefits that we wanted to get from Amazon, we got. So we didn't lose anything from it.
We have a question that's sort of related, and that is, how are you holding new companies accountable for community enrichment? And this person says, i.e., Audible.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, all of the companies, when they interface with the city, whether they get a variance or abatements or other things, some of the companies don't get that, right? But at the end of the day, all of these folks sit around a table that we begin to put pressure on them around hiring and buying and living. So Audible has increased its Newark residents in
you know what the percentage is now?
Because of the pressure.
Do you know what their percentage?
I don't know it off the top of my head. Because of the pressure that we put on them, they even helped subsidize some of the small businesses in the city by giving their employees allowances to purchase from Newark businesses in this community, right? They're expanding. So are they perfect? Are these things perfect? No. But our efforts and our discussions with them changes the kind of cultural mindset that these corporations had, that they've been having for 20, 30, 40 years, right? So these things are different, right? Prudential now pays full taxes on its tower. That hasn't happened before, right? Their level of interest in what happens in the city has to be about a collaborative effort and discussion. And it takes pressure, not just from us. It takes pressure from us, from the mayor's office, but pressure from us collectively. And so Audible has been doing a lot better. In fact, Audible has been doing better at some of the things in their relationship to the city than many of these corporations are down there.
Question for Mary. What are we doing to help parents to better educate their children? To help the parents to better educate.
In a conversation that I had earlier this week with the new superintendent, we talked briefly about we need to bring back adult ed programs. We used to have adult ed programs in every ward of the city. We used to have a fully functioning Newark Evening High School that was housed in Westside High School. So we used to have, but was dismantled in this last round of 6 years of dismantling the district. So we've got to restore those things because in some instances, parents themselves did not necessarily go all the way through and get a high school diploma and may want to go back and do that. But we have to be able to put, once again, what do we put into the schools that service the children that also service the parents? Because in the very school that your child could be in during the day, that same school could be used in the evening to offer opportunities for learning for parents.
Again, it takes money, right? I beg your pardon? That takes money.
It doesn't take as much money as you might think because you're not talking about another facility. You're talking about extending the use of the facilities that you now have.
With staff, with heating, with all of the rest.
But again, in the winter months, you've got to keep the heat on anyway unless you want the pipes to burst. So I mean, if you think about it, and if you plan for it, I'm not saying open 62 schools every day, day and night, but I am saying in each ward, there should be 4 or 5 schools that parents could possibly go to. And I think we have to help our parents to understand what's going on during the day in layman's terms as opposed to educational terms, so that they can understand the behavior we need them to help us to work to reinforce during the day, to create a mindset that when you come to school to learn, and that learning is fun, and to Junius's point, learning is relevant. You're seeing something and learning something that has some meaning. But definitely we need to restore adult ed programs and open our schools to them.
And that is, we often talk about gentrification in terms of residents, but what can or is being done to protect small business and develop entrepreneurs in the city?
So I can jump on that immediately, but I would like other people to answer if they want. I mean, Aisha Glover and CDC has been trying to craft a legislation for us that centers around inclusionary opportunities for retail businesses in the city. We are going to, I told her that, we need to try to begin to present that to the committee that's going to be dealing with inclusionary kind of opportunity, because I would like most of the stuff that we come up with to go through that as a clearinghouse to be able to see if that stuff is valid, so we don't, reinvent the wheel or fall down unnecessarily and then have to get back up again. That there are people who think about these things in a very intentional and thoughtful way. But there is an ordinance that is being crafted that centers around equitable, or I should say, inclusionary opportunities for retail in the city. But hopefully we can get it to the committee once it comes out and they can give us something that we really want to push.
Andrea, someone is asking what happens to kids in prison when they close. You touched on it, but right now, what happens?
Sure. So right now, we got the closure announcement under Governor Christie before he left. Jamesburg and Hayes are still open, which is exactly why we wanted to call for a task force to oversee the closure plan. If you go to the Institute's website, njisj.org, you'll see that we have a vision document we laid out for what will happen to the kids once these facilities are closed. Our vision is to have what we call a push-down model, where first, as many kids as possible should be pushed down to the community. Because we know all these kids that are getting arrested don't need to be going away. If they had diversion programs, if they had prevention programs, if they had intervention programs, if they had alternatives to incarceration programs, they could be in their home communities. So keep the kids in the communities if we can. If they need to be in out-of-home placement, let's look to develop more rehabilitative settings. Let's look at what we already have. We don't need to be building anything new. We don't need to be funneling more and more money into creating a prison industrial complex for our young people. In Missouri, for example, what they've done by transforming their entire youth justice system is to look at
old schools, old churches, buildings and parks, and how can we renovate this to make this a home-like environment for the kids, close to their families and homes. And so we specifically did not support and do not support the building of any new structures until we look at what we already have that's rehabilitated for our kids that's working today.
Eunice, I'm going to throw the last audience question to you. What does it look like to hold elected officials accountable?
Wow. Well, one way you hold people accountable is through elections, and that happened yesterday. We saw what happened in the House. We saw what didn't happen in the Senate. That's because certain sectors of the population got mad, but we don't have enough people getting mad. The first thing we need to do is to get mad and sustain that anger. I come from a time when we got mad and we stayed mad and we channeled that anger into organization. Now, because of the way the media is, you get these sound bites, boom, 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 boom. Well, I'm mad today about this, I'm mad today about that. So I think the best thing people can do is to learn how to organize.
Eunice, I think one of the things you told me that you were mad about, and I am too, is our water. Talk about the water.
Water. Of course we are mad about the water because see what happens on a global sense. This country has decided to put all of its money into building weapons of mass destruction. So the things that the federal government should be doing and the state government should be doing, they're not doing it. We pay overtime galore to police officers. We pay overtime galore to people out there in Washington building Boeings. But we don't put money into the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is crumbling all over America. It is impossible for the city of Newark to, on its own, change the water pipes. It is necessary for the city of Newark, and I hear the mayor doing it, to look at the situation and come up with some short-term solutions, but to plan and to fight for, and that's where we come in, to fight for the long-term solution, which is to get back our money from our taxpayer dollars to put it into something that's going to be really useful, like changing the damn pipes under the street.
So I hope people voted for the bond yesterday, that the bond which they put on the ballot to raise the dollars to do just that, begin to invest in infrastructure, to change pipes that are going into the school systems first, right? So we need people that, so I hope everybody voted for that. If you didn't know it was on there, all the advocates should have told you it was on there. So secondly, you know, we're gonna need people to raise their voices because under the Christie administration, we got them to agree to give us forgiveness loans to residents to use public dollars to change their lead service lines in their homes. We're still struggling with now to be able to get that money so we can begin to use it. I mean, the money is present, but to be able to use it in terms of forgiving people so they don't have to pay $4,000, $7,000, $8,000 to change a lead service lines in their house.
$1,000 would be the cost to the homeowner? And
well, up to $1,000.
Up to $1,000.
And the city has
How do you get that?
And the city has a right to.
How do you do that? I've applied twice.
And well, no. What you have to do is fill out the paper. Yeah. When they send it to you, send it back. So now, like I said, right. We're struggling. We're struggling with the state to be able to get them to move this forward. That's what we're doing, and that happens. So you have to send the paper back because we need permission. We can't go on your property because the pipe is yours.
No, that's fine.
Right, we can't go on your property and fix it because it doesn't belong to the city. It belongs to you. And we are actually saying that the state and the federal government should, as Julia said, should provide the resources for residents to fix this. Because in 1986, lead was banned in 1986 in all fixtures. Everybody around the country knew that there's lead pipes. Everybody knows this. That's why we all have corrosion control inhibitors in our water to prevent lead from leaching from individuals' pipes. But it would cost trillions of dollars for the government to invest in that, but instead they invest in other things, war and other kinds of things, instead of infrastructure, as Julia said. So cities have to take the responsibility to be creative to get the dollars that's necessary to help people fix the lead service lines in their house. That's what we've done since April 2017. We are pushing that Still, we need support.
Well, thank you for the
We need
filter.
support. We need support for that.
I'm going to give the last word to my friend Paul Fishman, because you are somebody who is bringing new business into downtown Newark. You are bringing your firm to Newark.
I thought my sister was in Michigan.
Would it have happened? Would you be doing this 10 years ago?
So I did do it. I did it 20 years ago, right? So look, like a lot.
But would Arnold and Porter be interested in doing it 10 years ago?
So I maybe because of the business model that we've got, but also, some people in this room think I'm a relatively persuasive person under certain circumstances. The mayor's nodding. I'm not sure whether he agrees all the time. But look, I've been working in this city since 1983. I said at the beginning, and even though there are a lot of people I know whose parents came from Newark, and they sort of gravitated back to Newark because of their parents. That didn't happen. My father was from the Bronx, my mother was from Brooklyn. They moved to Bergen County, and I sort of ended up back in Newark kind of on my own in this way. But I've become enormously fond of the city. I know
It happens, doesn't it?
And it's weird because I have, I'm friends with all of the other U.S. attorneys from the 8 years of the Obama administration, and they know I'm from Newark, and that's not always the most endearing conversation to have with everybody, as you can imagine, because they're not so respectful all the time. But the truth is, this is a place that gets into you, right? And not in the way that the lead does. This place gets into your system, and so 20 years ago, I joined a law firm after I left the U.S. Attorney's Office the first time. I joined a firm. We opened the Newark office at Gateway, and we grew the firm. And then
you've gone for service.
And then I got privileged and lucky enough to be nominated by Barack Obama to be the U.S. Attorney. And I was still here and did 8 years more of public service. And now I'm doing this again. What I love about Arnold and Porter, and the reason we're doing it, and the reason the firm was willing to do it, is this is a law firm. It's headquartered in Washington. You all don't know necessarily a lot about it, but this is the firm that represented Clarence Gideon in the case that established the right to counsel. And we are a firm that is so proud of our history of civic engagement. And so when I was talking to my new partners about where we would open, we could open in Morristown, we could open in Roseland, we could open in Princeton, but it was really important to me and to the people in my firm that we be here. Because of our commitment to what it means to be in an urban environment, whether it's gentrifying or something else, really important. And the last thing, I'll tell you one story. I'm a gentrifier, exactly. I'm a gentrifier. But I'll tell you something. It is also true, though, that I eat in Newark all the time. I do eat in Montclair, but I eat in Newark all the time. Right. But I want to say this one story I told Sandy yesterday, and I'll close with this. I spent a lot of time scoping out office space. And we ended up back in One Gateway, partly because it's so close to the train station, and 600 of the lawyers, it's a small, intimate firm of 1,000 lawyers, right? So 600 of the lawyers in my firm are on the Northeast Corridor somewhere, and it's convenient for us. And I spent a lot of time scoping out the space, and I picked out for myself a nice, beautiful corner office on the 10th floor of Gateway 1, on the southeast corner of the building, with a great view of Newark Airport and a great view of New York City. And then I find out like 6 or 7 weeks ago that there's a large building that some guy named Shaq is going to build outside my window. Now at my height, when I was 30 years old, if I lied just a little bit, I was 5'5". And now, not for the first time in my life, as a man who is 5'5", my view is going to be blocked by a 7-foot-tall man. And I know it's great for the city, I really do. But can you move it like 12 feet to the left, just so I can still see the airport? Actually, it's great. I mean, I'm so excited about this forum. I'm so excited about Newark, and I'm delighted to be here because I think it's going to be great.
And I'm so glad you're here. So, Paul Fishman and I think all of us here have great affection for this city. Most of us live here. And some of us are newcomers to the city, and we were very glad to have you. Let me just say that one of the things we need is not just to have a Paul Fishman come in and open a law office, but have our kids want to stay here. Have our kids looking to stay here. And I'm going to close my part of the program by throwing again to the screen behind me. 30 years ago, I went to a Newark High School prom, and I asked one question to all the kids, and that is,
will you dance with me? No.
What do you want to do after graduation? Do you want to stay here? And so, Tanya, let's roll that.
I plan to go to New Brunswick College, Rutgers New Brunswick College, take up computer technician, and live in California.
Not Newark?
No.
Where do you want to live?
In a middle class neighborhood.
Not Newark?
Not Newark.
I guess down south somewhere.
Not Newark.
Not in Newark.
Why?
I don't like the neighborhoods.
It's all right. And if I make it further, I'll go.
I stay in Newark.
I stay in Newark.
I stay in Newark because Newark is going through like a renaissance. They're trying to make it better. So I'll stay here.
Ready to move. The Rams have the power. They got the mic. The Rams got the power. They got the mic. They got the power. The mic. So fight, fight, fight.
Hey, let's clap it up for our panelists. And let's give a round of applause to Sandy King, our moderator. I just want to say very briefly, I was thinking about this panel and I was listening to the conversation, and there were two words that really captured what I think is the theme of this moment that we're in, and it is stay and build. And when my daughter was in high school, university, I'll be honest with you, there were some of her teachers who encouraged her to go to college away and to stay away. And we said, yeah, you're gonna go to a fancy college. It was called Spelman College, whose theme, I know there's some Spelmanites in the audience, is women who serve. You're going to go to Spelman and get the tools to come back home. Because the goal is to come back home to this mighty city and begin to build. And my wife is the principal at Avon Avenue School. I can't tell you how, let's clap for Avon Avenue School. I can't tell you how many times I've heard her say to her students that the goal of this education you get here is to equip you to be able to live in the city of Newark as an adult. And so there's a stay piece, but the second piece is to build. And one of the reasons why I have such a good relationship with the mayor is because I can come to him with ideas that are like Colin Kaepernick crazy, right? You know, Colin Kaepernick isn't crazy enough, and he's there. And so I think part of what our charge is in this room is to figure out what it means to build. And so there was a quick question about what it means to hold elected officials accountable. I gotta share the story with you because this is part of what it means to build accountability. And so folks know I had the opportunity to serve on the transition team of Governor Murphy. Governor Murphy campaigned as a very progressive governor. And the transition team was important because I'm a policy guy. I want to affect social justice. I want to do change. Policies that got into the transition document I thought would be easy wins for us. And the document came out in January. We had a meeting with the governor in May. And in that meeting, we were lifting up policy issues, and the governor paused to say, well, you know, you all, I got 94% of the black vote. It was an interesting to share to a room mostly full of black folks who were aware of how he got elected. Governor Murphy got 94% of the black vote. He got 82% of the Latino vote. He only got 47% of the white vote. You follow me?
Say it again.
But for the black and Latino vote, it's very unlikely that Governor Murphy becomes the governor of New Jersey. So we say back, hey, are you mentioning that to remind us of your popularity among black voters, or because given the 94%, you have a specific plan to address some of these racial disparities we've talked about tonight? And at that moment in May, he did not frankly have the kind of plan we thought was appropriate given near unanimous support from black voters. Some of that, you all, is on us. We voted yesterday. Folks braved the rain to vote enthusiastically. You all were in the polling places. The lines were longer than they are traditionally because folks recognize the power of the vote, but voting extends beyond the day. And that after you vote, you have to hold elected officials accountable. So yes, we met with the governor in May. We got that response. June, July, August happened. We then decided the best thing to do would be to pen an article to hold the governor accountable and then to hold a rally for the 94% to advance policies and at the same time hold the governor accountable. Many of you were there. That happened a few Saturdays ago in the midst of a nor'easter, and there were 500 people at the church that Dr. King visited 50 years ago to hold Governor Murphy accountable. And so as we're being pulled. So as I get the hook, the concrete takeaway is this. The part of building requires us to push for policies and practices that interrupt systems that continue to put us with these racial disparities over time. And so I want you to take with you a poster that we created for the rally for the 94%, which has specific policy proposals around how you close a racial wealth gap, how you transform youth justice, how, like in Florida, you restore voting rights for people with criminal convictions. Sign up to join us to push these policies and hold elected officials accountable as we stay and as we build. Thank you all.